So how do we get where we're at today? Let's give you the short, very short story. This would have been stuff you were supposed to review or supposed to have gone over in U.S. history in 11th grade and 7th. So let's go over the basics. Influences on American government. The Americans did not just sit down when they finally got their independence and said, and made up a government all on their own. They had influences from other places, okay? So, the first colony that we had in the United States was at Jamestown, Virginia, 1607. That was the first successful colony, okay, that happened. That was John Smith and Pocahontas, okay, and John Rolfe planting tobacco, and Jamestown made a bunch of money, and more people started coming over after a really rough early stretch, okay. Now at Jamestown, two early traditions were established: limited government and representative government. People at Jamestown elected their own officials, okay. Now the ancient Greeks and Romans also influenced the Americans, okay. The ancient Greeks and Romans had direct and representative democracy, so the founding fathers kind of took that idea and ran with it, okay. They decided to incorporate it into our government. The Magna Carta in 1215, that took powers away from King John of England and gave it to the British nobles. Now, that was the first attempt in which, like, the people got together and cornered the king and stripped him of some of his powers and gave more to the people. So that had a heavy influence on the Americans. Parliament, that's the lawmaking body of Britain. You want to make a new law in Great Britain? You go to Parliament. These are the guys who are going to do it. They're the British version of the American Congress. Okay, so Parliament. This is just a information slide. This is not in your notes. Okay, Parliament is located here, and you probably have heard of Big Ben, the big clock tower, not the quarterback for the Steelers. These are the guys who make the laws. There's me at Big Ben. Yes, I know you're very, very happy because history is coming alive in our little note session here. Fantastic. Okay, moving on. Anyway, other things that are going to happen. The Petition of Right, okay, that was another thing that influenced the Americans. Basically, it was like the Magna Carta, but instead of just giving power to nobles, it gave power to commoners as well. So the common people got to be involved in the decision-making process. Hooray. In addition to that, you had the English Bill of Rights. We have a Bill of Rights in our Constitution, okay? Now, King William and Queen Mary eventually came to an agreement with Parliament to prevent future monarchs from abusing their powers. Now, this Bill of Rights guaranteed free parliamentary elections, so you could vote, you the citizens, on who you wanted to be in Parliament. You could get a fair and speedy trial, which we're going to incorporate into our Bill of Rights. Freedom from excessive bails and cruel and unusual punishment, we'll have that as well. And the right to petition the king, so you can state your problems you have. But one of the big things that influenced the founding fathers was the Enlightenment. Now, you should have learned about this in world history. The Enlightenment era had a bunch of philosophers that challenged the current political authority. During the Enlightenment, people came forward and said, well, wait a minute, why should we listen to a king or queen who's been given their position of power through nothing other than birth? They weren't elected. They didn't show they were the best or brightest. They were just born into the position. And people started to question that during the Enlightenment. Is this really a good idea to run things? That God had chosen a certain person to be king or queen. Some people had a problem with that. People like John Locke, okay? John Locke was a philosopher, and Thomas Jefferson really liked this guy. Okay? John Locke supported the concept of a social contract, where government and the people form a contract or agree that the two are going to work together. Now, Locke argued that people are born with natural rights to life, liberty, and property. Thomas Jefferson's going to take this line and he's just going to kind of make it his own. He's going to write in the Declaration of Independence that the people are been given certain unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness instead of property. He wrote that in the Declaration of Independence. Jefferson did the majority of the writing for the Declaration of Independence. He'll eventually become your third president as well. So, Locke, just an informative slide about him. Okay, he came up with the idea of the social contract, the government and the people working together, the belief that all men were created equal, free and equal, not just people born in nobility. He believed in the separation of church and state, okay, and his writings are really going to influence the founding fathers, okay. They are littered throughout the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. So they liked this guy's ideas and said, maybe we could use that when we break away from the British and form our own government. So life, liberty, and property, that was Locke's big thing, and he wrote about this in his books. Okay, he did not like the idea of divine right, which meant kings and queens ruled and they were given their power from God. Okay, he didn't believe that. So he wrote about this, and his ideas will eventually influence the American founding fathers. So, to the colonies. The British colonies are going to be the ones that eventually revolt against England. There were 13 of them. Now, it took a few hundred years for this to happen, but almost a few hundred years for this to happen. But here's how it went down. From 1607 to 1776, the American colonies basically did what they wanted for the most part. Okay, the British really left them alone. Okay, it's kind of like, they were ignored. They were just, left to their own devices. They were allowed to come up with their own things. They still had loyalty to England. Okay, they all recognized that England was their daddy, right, so to speak. But at the same time, they were allowed a great deal of freedom. Okay, so each colony was founded on a charter from the king. So they had to be founded with the king's permission. But after they were founded, they were given a great deal of freedom. And as the generations went by, as more and more Americans are born and the older people started to die off, you're going to have people who are living in the Americas after a few hundred years, or after 100 years go by, and they're going to say, well, I've never been to England, so why are we loyal to these people? Okay, they're going to start questioning it. They're going to have, in the Americas, certain institutions that are going to spring up, okay, and the colonies are going to start creating their own system of laws, so to speak. In the House of Burgesses in Virginia, it was the first representative legislature, so guys who made laws in the American colonies, and they made it so only adult male property owners could vote. When the Pilgrims came over on the Mayflower, okay, in 1620, the men aboard the ship signed the Mayflower Compact. Now, ladies, my apologies, you will not really be involved in the government process at all, and you will not be voting either. We got a long way to go till that happens, so my apologies, but I'm just giving you the information. So when the Pilgrims came over on the Mayflower, and they were fleeing for religious reasons, that's why they came to the Americas, the men on the ship came up with the Mayflower Compact, and this was basically how they were going to govern themselves, and the men were going to have the majority of the power. Now, problems are going to start existing between the American colonies and the British after the French and Indian War. The French and Indian War, it's also called the 7 Years' War, it's called the 7 Years' War in Europe. Basically, this was a fight between the British and the French. And part of it involved the colonies in the Americas. Now, after this war was over, the British win. The problem was the British spent a ton of money to win this war. Okay? They basically almost went bankrupt doing it. But what did the British get out of the French and Indian War? They basically took this shaded area right here from France. So the British just got their hands on a whole new chunk of territory. These are the original 13 colonies. Now the British are broke. They need money. They need a way to make up those expenses that they just spent winning all this territory during that war. So one of the quickest ways to get money when you're broke and you're a government is to tax the citizens. So the British are going to, after a long time of not paying attention to the colonists, are now going to start reining them in a little bit. Okay, it's like a child who starts getting out of control and a parent disciplining them. So new taxes are going to be created that's going to generate revenue for the British Empire. So, new taxes such as Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, that's the big one. The colonists hated that. The Townshend Acts of 1767. The colonists hated these taxes, and the big line they're going to use against these taxes was no taxation without representation. If you want to tax us, that's fine, okay? But you have to allow us to represent ourselves in British Parliament, where they were making these laws. If you guys want to make laws taxing the colonies, cool. Allow us to be in on the lawmaking process. But if you just hand them down without giving us any right to listen in on your meetings whatsoever, we think that's unfair. So the colonists are going to start protesting all these taxes. You better hope you weren't a stamp agent during this time period where you had to collect taxes for the Stamp Act, which would have been taxes on any kind of paper products, because you were going to be in trouble. They might tar and feather you. So events are going to start boiling over. All right, people are going to be upset at the British. You're going to have the Boston Massacre take place, where the British are going to open fire on a crowd of people in Boston. You're going to have the Boston Tea Party, where they're fighting against a tax on British tea. After the Boston Tea Party, the British passed this, the Coercive or